Hi, Mark from Enchantment of Eternity here to count down my top 10 favorite episodes of Star Trek the Original Series. My list may not match up with popular opinion or what you may find on most other lists, however, I'm here to state my opinion on what the best TOS episodes are regardless of popular opinion. But before I jump into my top 10, I'll start by naming a few honorable mentions that didn't quite make my list. First honorable mention is the Squire of Gothos, where the crew encounters a mischievous being with godlike powers who toys with the crew. Next honorable mention is the Cage, the first pilot, where Captain Pike finds himself tricked and captured by an alien race that has mastered the power of illusion. And my final honorable mention is the Tholian Web, where the Enterprise enters a strange area of space and Kirk is lost in another dimension while they are being slowly encased in a deadly energy web by the mysterious Tholians. Now, getting into my top 10, we'll start with my number 10, Whom Gods Destroy, where Kirk and Spock are trapped in an insane asylum by a madman who calls himself Lord Garth, who is, in my opinion, the most menacing and interesting villain to appear in the original series. This episode is very entertaining with the over-the-top performances of the criminally insane, while at the same time presenting a very looming and ever-present sense of danger and suspense more effectively than most episodes of the series. Number 9 on my list is The Alternative Factor, which may surprise some, as this episode is more often to appear on a worst list rather than a best list. However, this episode has always been a favorite of mine, as I find the premise of the two different versions of the same man locked in a universe-crossing struggle that threatens to unravel the very fabric of reality to be an extremely fascinating premise indeed. And the melancholic ending where Lazarus has to sacrifice himself to an eternity at the hands of a madman who wants to kill him in order to save two universes to be richly dark in the best way possible. Next is my number 8 on my list is Errand of Mercy, an episode most known for being the first appearance of the Klingons in the franchise. However, I appreciate this episode more for its anti-war message, as it sees Kirk and Spock trying to secure a strategically important planet in the war against the Klingons. However, the planet's inhabitants don't want to help Kirk in any way and seem oblivious to the danger that they're in. Eventually, the Organians reveal themselves to be powerful energy beings who feel they have no alternative other than to make it physically impossible for Starfleet and the Klingons to attack each other. This is not only a fascinating premise with a great reveal, but also a great character story for Kirk, who is forced to face his desire for conflict and to question it. Number 7 on my list is Mirror Mirror, where Kirk and his landing party beam back to the Enterprise only to find themselves in a dark parallel universe. Kirk and crew are forced to interact with the twisted and dark versions of their crewmates, including a Spock who tortures people at a whim and threatens to assassinate Kirk unless he follows the Empire's orders to commit genocide on a peaceful people. This episode is not only a fascinating premise and most people's introductions to a parallel universe story, but also an intense thrill ride as our heroes are in danger at every turn as they attempt to escape this twisted hellscape. Next, we'll get to my number 6, which is The Cloudminders, an episode that makes powerful commentary on class inequality in a way that is true to Star Trek. Our crew travels to a world to retrieve a life-saving mineral for a world in dire need, only to be impeded by a dispute between the mine workers and the aristocracy that controls the planet. This episode features Kirk having to deal with an arrogant dictator above and disgruntled workers below who misdirect their anger of their oppression at him. And also, unusual about this episode is Spock is the one who gets the love interest rather than Kirk. Overall, The Cloudminders makes for a unique episode with strong social commentary representing the best of what TOS has to offer. So now we'll get to my number 5, which is All Our Yesterdays. This is another unique episode that's true to Trek, as it explores a unique sci-fi concept of a planet about to be destroyed by a supernova, where its inhabitants escape that doom by traveling to its own past. I love how the story is disseminated. We first have Kirk and his landing party meet the mysterious librarian Mr. Atos and his replicants, and then have Kirk get trapped in a medieval-esque past where McCoy and Spock get trapped in an ice age as they have to struggle to get back to the present before the sun goes nova. And they throw in a great romance between Spock and a woman banished to the past, and an extremely effective love story that adds to the tragedy when Spock is forced to leave her behind. Overall, a powerful and thought-provoking episode. So next, let's get to my number 4, The Changeling. This episode deals with an old Earth probe that got mangled with an alien harvesting device that turned it into a destructive killing machine capable of destroying entire planets that's determined to reach its origins, which is Earth. And there it will find what it deems imperfect beings and will kill everyone. So the tension in this episode is sky high as this unstoppable killing machine roams the corridors of the Enterprise, killing anyone that gets in its way. And Kirk seems to be in an impossible situation, but eventually he manages to outwit the device, causing it to self-destruct, an ending that to me is one of the most satisfying of the original series. So now we come to my number 3, Balance of Terror. This episode features the Enterprise chasing a lone Romulan vessel guilty of destroying several Starfleet outposts in an attempt to start a war. Part of what makes this episode so special is the scenes we get from the perspective of the Romulans, which gives these villains a face and adds a lot of dynamic to these characters rather than making them the standard generic bad guys. In addition, there was a storyline with an officer that has bigotry for Spock when he learned of the similarities between Vulcans and Romulans, but Kirk has no tolerance for that. And also a storyline where a couple who were meant to get married, but the groom dies during the battle and Kirk has to console the widow, which was a very poignant scene indeed. But most of all was the kinship that Kirk and the Romulan commander shared, as in many ways the two were alike and in fact really respected each other despite actively trying to kill one another. A very powerful episode. So next, we'll get to my number 2, which is A Taste of Armageddon, a unique sci-fi concept that's actually more relevant today than it was back in the 60s, as it deals with a planet that wages war through computers. That is, the computers calculate the battles, how many casualties, and the casualties simply report to disintegration chambers so their deaths may be recorded. But in doing so, they've made war more clean and tolerable, which it should not be, as war is something that should be avoided at all costs, which is a great analogy for modern day warfare. And when Kirk is caught up in the war, as his entire crew and passengers on board the Enterprise has been declared casualties of this war and are expected to report to the disintegration chambers, Kirk strives to put an end to their clean war and turn it back into a hot, dirty, nasty war in order to remind these people that war should be avoided at all costs. A super intense and suspenseful episode with great character moments and powerful allegories, making this one of the best that TOS has to offer. And finally, we come to my number 1 favorite episode of Star Trek The Original Series, and that is City on the Edge of Forever. This episode has a fascinating sci-fi concept behind it, that a sentient time travel portal known as the Guardian of Forever. However, when a drugged out McCoy is in a paranoid state, he travels through the time portal and the timeline is altered so that the Enterprise no longer exists. Only the Landon party, which has been shielded from from the time change remain, and so Kirk and Spock must travel into the past to try to fix whatever it was that McCoy altered. And so they end up traveling to 1930s New York City, where Kirk meets and falls in love with a remarkable woman. And out of all the romances featuring Kirk in the original series, this is the only one that I truly bought, as this was earned. The fact that Kirk really loved her. However, they soon learned that she is the focal point in time that they were looking for, as McCoy saved her life, which is what altered the flow of time for the worse. So in order to put things right, Kirk must ensure that the love of his life die. And this leads to a tragic ending, one of the most powerful in all of fiction, making this a remarkable classic sci-fi story, not just for Star Trek, but for all of fiction, making this my number one best episode of Star Trek the original series. So that's it for my top 10 best episodes of Star Trek the original series. Be sure to check out my channel for a full-length review of every episode of Star Trek the original series, as well as many more videos on Star Trek. And thanks so much for watching.